The first crawler came out of the tree line at 0340 local, and I was already awake to see it. I had been awake for most of the previous 4 nights. Sleep in the EN Basin during the wet transition is difficult even without the sounds, the deep chitina scraping, the low resonant clicking that carries through loam and root systems before it ever breaks surface. I had been noting the sounds for 11 days. I had filed 3 preliminary observation reports. All 3 had been returned with a classification hold and a polite note from the Reach 4 Liaison Office suggesting I wait for corroborating data before drawing conclusions about the origin of the organisms. The crawler that came out of the tree line at 0340 was approximately 4 meters in length. It moved on 6 articulated limb clusters, the forward pair modified into something between a gripping appendage and a puncture tool. It was not a native species. I had a complete catalogue of every arthropod-adjacent organism documented in the basin over 14 years of survey work, and this was not in it. I photographed it from the observation blind for 40 seconds. Then it crossed the perimeter wire of the Cullen family resettlement plot, went through the door of the secondary dwelling, and I stopped photographing. I filed a 4th report at 0420, with images attached, and marked it urgent. The liaison office responded at 1100 the following morning. They asked whether I could confirm the organism was not a known basin species that had undergone stress-triggered morphological change. I confirmed it. They thanked me and said the matter was being reviewed. I drove to the Cullen plot at 0800. The secondary dwelling had been breached from the inside out, which told me the organism had not simply entered and left but had encountered something it chose to press against with considerable force. The family of 4 who had been sleeping in that building was gone. I found Murray Cullen's field boots beside the door, one of them still laced. People who run in panic at 0340 do not stop to remove their boots. I documented what I found and sent it, without comment, with the 5th report. By the end of the first week, I had documented 4 confirmed crawler events. 6 colonists were dead, 2 adults on the eastern approach corridor, 1 teenager who had gone out to check on livestock, 3 members of a survey work crew who had been sleeping in portable shelters near the northern extraction boundary. The liaison office sent a security advisory recommending that basin residents remain indoors after dark and avoid unsecured structures. It did not mention the crawlers by name. It did not mention the organisms at all. It cited elevated predator activity. I sent my data package to Reach Command's Biological Analysis Division on day 9. I sent it directly, bypassing the liaison office, which was outside my operating authority and which I did not care about at that point. The package contained full morphological documentation, movement track data from the basin's ground sensor net, and a preliminary conclusion that I had spent 2 days making certain I could not argue myself out of. The phalanx crawlers, that was what I named them in the report, for the forward limb configuration, were not wild organisms. They were constructed. The bilateral symmetry was too precise. The forward limb morphology was functionally optimized in a way that convergent evolution does not produce in a moisture basin arthropod niche. Someone had built them, and someone had put them here. Reach Command's Biological Division sent an acknowledgement in 4 hours. Then a senior analyst called me on a closed channel, which had not happened in 22 years of fieldwork, and asked me to walk him through my methodology from the beginning. I walked him through it. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he asked me one question: how confident was I in the construction assessment? I told him I would not have filed it if I were not certain. He said, Dr. Varick, stay in the basin. Do not leave. Do not communicate this assessment through the liaison office or any Reach 4 administrative channel. We are sending a secondary analysis team. The secondary team arrived on day 14. 3 people, no institutional markings on their equipment. They spent 4 days in the basin with me, running their own sensor sweeps, recovering 2 deceased crawlers from a dried watercourse, performing a field dissection that I observed and documented. On day 18, they packed their equipment, shook my hand, and left on an unmarked transport. The crawlers kept coming. I kept documenting. By day 30, the displacement from the basin's 12 active resettlement corridors was running at roughly 300 colonists per week, families loading what they could carry and moving to the transit staging areas at the basin's northern and southern mouths. The liaison office was now issuing weekly safety communications describing an unusual arthropod population surge and recommending temporary precautionary relocation. There was no mention of the origin of the organisms. There was no mention of the Dreverthai Sovereignty's extraction leases on the sub-basin mineral deposits that lay directly beneath the resettlement corridors. On day 22, I encountered a crawler directly, in daylight, at the Eastern Survey Trail junction. I had come around a bend in the root tangle path and it was 8 meters ahead of me, feeding on something I did not look at closely. It was larger than the first specimen, closer to 5 meters. It turned toward me, and for approximately 4 seconds we held that position. I have been in the field for 31 years. I have worked survey posts on 4 worlds with documented apex predator populations. What I noticed in those 4 seconds was not that the crawler was dangerous, though it was. What I noticed was that its forward limb orientation was not a feeding posture. It was evaluative. It was reading me, cataloging me, deciding. That is not arthropod behavior. That is engineered behavior. It turned away and moved off into the root systems. I stood on the path for another minute, then took my notes and kept walking. I had found the lease documentation in the Basin's public land registry on day 26. It had been filed under a subsidiary name that required 3 corporate registry lookups to connect to the sovereignty's primary commercial arm. The filing date was 14 months before the first crawler event. I added it to the report package and sent it to the same analyst at Reach Command. He did not call me back this time. He sent a forward message on the closed channel. We have it all. By day 51, the death count was 209. I kept a separate document for the names. The official figure in the liaison officer's public communications was lower. They were counting only the deaths they could attribute to direct organism contact with physical evidence recovered. I was counting everyone the Basin's medical station had logged as missing and unrecovered. The methodology was different. The people were just as dead. On day 63, a woman named Tala Brennish walked 3 kilometers from her resettlement plot carrying her daughter, who was 9 years old and had been injured in a crawler event 2 days earlier. She walked to my observation post because she had heard there was a researcher who was documenting. She sat down across the table from me and said, in a voice that was entirely flat, that she wanted to make sure someone who was keeping records knew that her daughter's name was Piri. I wrote Piri Brennish's name in the document. I told Tala that I had the name and I would not lose it. She nodded and walked back to the transit staging area to wait for the next transport out. On day 63, I also received a message, through proper channels this time, a formal communication from Reach Command addressed to Dr. Seneveric, Field Intelligence Liaison, EN Basin Survey Station. The title change was the first indication. I was no longer a field biologist on an extended research posting. I had been reclassified, retroactive to day 9, which was the date I had bypassed the liaison office and sent the data package directly. The message instructed me to maintain my position, continue all documentation, and report to a senior intelligence officer who would be arriving at the Basin's northern transit point on day 65. His name was Commander Oren Salt, and he arrived in a uniform I did not recognize, with 4 staff members who had the quiet efficiency of people who had been doing this particular type of work for a long time. He shook my hand and said, without preamble, that the analysis of the recovered crawler specimens was complete and the assessment had been forwarded to Earth through the consolidated Reach Command chain. He said that what happened next was not going to be announced in advance, and that I should make arrangements to complete my field documentation within the next 10 days. I asked him what was going to happen next. He looked at me for a moment. 230 warships, he said. The designation is the Halcyon measure. The destination is the Drevathai home system. Not the Basin. Not the extraction sites. The home system. I understood what he was telling me. I asked whether the Drevathai had been given an opportunity to respond. He said they had been presented with the biological analysis, the lease documentation, and a formal notice of Earth's assessment. The sovereignty's response had been to deny the connection between their commercial subsidiary and the crawler program and to request a joint investigative commission with a 12-month timeline. Earth's consolidated Reach Command had reviewed the request and authorized the Halcyon measure. I asked Salt what 230 warships meant, in practical terms, for the Drevathai home system. He said it meant the sovereignty would not be making that kind of calculation again. He said it in a tone that was not satisfied, not angry. It was the tone of a man describing a procedure that had been correctly authorized and would be correctly executed. I spent the next 10 days completing my documentation. On day 73, I wrote the final field entry in the Basin survey log: 612 dead, 41,217 displaced. The Basin's 12 resettlement corridors were empty. The Drevathai extraction teams had moved in 4 days after the last colonists cleared the southern transit point. They were operating openly now, no longer needing the cover. They had made a calculation that the human administrative infrastructure would process, review, and deliberate, and that by the time any meaningful response was organized, the extraction would be a matter of established economic fact on the ground. They had made that calculation, and I could not say they were wrong to make it, based on everything the liaison office had done across 63 days. What they had not accounted for was the secondary analysis team that had arrived on day 14 and the analyst at Reach Command who had been running a parallel assessment that bypassed the administrative infrastructure entirely. On day 76, I was aboard the Carrick Wren *, the Halcyon Measures lead vessel, standing at a secondary observation console on the bridge as Commander Salt received the final departure authorization from Reach Command. 230 warships. I had asked to be present, and Salt had permitted it without discussion, which I think was his way of acknowledging what the Basin survey log represented. The bridge was quiet in a way I had not expected. I had imagined, without quite realizing I was imagining it, that a fleet of 230 warships departing for an enemy home system would carry some particular energy, ceremony, weight, a sense of occasion. What I found instead was a room of people completing a procedure. Stations checked, corridors cleared, transit vectors confirmed and locked. The authorization from Reach Command came through as a single line of text on Salt's command display. He read it, acknowledged it, and gave the departure order in a voice that would have been appropriate for a routine patrol rotation. That was the right register. The decision had been made weeks ago. What remained was the execution. The fleet moved out of Reach 4's transit corridor in formation, at a pace I had not expected. Not cautious. Not procedural. The kind of pace that tells you the decision has been made and there is nothing left to deliberate. I watched the Basin's crescent fall away on the viewport display, the amber curve of its cloud layer, the dark irregular shapes of its highland ridges. Somewhere down in that amber haze, the extraction teams were still working. They did not yet know what was coming, because Earth had not announced it and the Drevathai Sovereignty's communication networks were being held at a passive intercept hold by Reach Command assets that had been in position since day 20. I turned back to my console and opened the survey log. I added one more line. Day 76. Documentation complete. The Halcyon measure is underway. The Basin Biological Survey, initial posting 14 years, redesignated Field Intelligence Liaison record on day 9 of the crawler event, is hereby closed. Findings transmitted in full to Consolidated Reach Command, Earth. I closed the file and saved it. 612 people. 41,000 displaced. One 9-year-old girl named Piri Brennish who walked 3 kilometers with her mother because she wanted to make sure someone with a record knew her name. The Halcyon measure had 230 warships. That was the answer Earth decided those names were worth. I did not think it was too many.